Have you ever spent years of your life with someone, building a future together, only to discover that none of it was ever real? Asterisk, I met Andrew when I was 22 years old, working the closing shift at a grimy little bar that smelled of stale beer and broken dreams. He was a burst of light in that dim place, incredibly outgoing. The kind of person who could make a stranger feel like a lifelong friend within minutes. He stayed until I finished mopping the floors and we ended up at an all-night diner, talking over coffee and waffles until the sun came up. The chemistry between us was instant and undeniable. It wasn't long before we were inseparable. Andrew became my anchor, my rock, the steady ground beneath my feet when my own world felt chaotic. He learned to love my obsession with cheesy B-movie horror, and after weeks of his enthusiastic pleading, I finally agreed to join him on his outdoor adventures. He was the life of every party, constantly dragging me out to meet his vast circle of friends for bowling, laser tag, or his absolute favorite activity, late-night hikes through the woods behind the very bar where we first met. His belief in me changed my life. Just 6 months after we started dating, with his unwavering support, I quit that miserable bartending job. I started my own small business in a niche field I was truly passionate about. The money wasn't fantastic, but I loved the work. Even the worst day was infinitely better than cleaning up someone else's mess. The night he proposed was perfect. It was at a 40th anniversary screening of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. During the "Damn It, Janet" number, he got down on one knee. Our friends, his wonderful friends who had become my friends, erupted in cheers and took us out for celebratory drinks afterward. I moved into his quaint 2-bedroom house, and my life felt like a personal heaven. I had fulfilling work, a vibrant social circle, and I was engaged to the most amazing man I had ever known. One morning, as I was hauling laundry from his ancient basement dryer, Andrew bounded down the stairs with that familiar excited glint in his eye. "I found the perfect place for a hike and a picnic," he announced, wrapping his arms around me. Just the two of us. We haven't had any real time alone since he moved in. I was tired, but his enthusiasm was infectious. "All right," I agreed, letting him kiss my neck. A day in nature with just you sounds amazing. He packed his hiking bag with a mischievous smile, promising a secluded spot near a spring with nooks and crannies out of sight from the main trails. The drive was long, and I dozed off in the passenger seat, lulled by the hum of the engine. He woke me as we arrived at the entrance to a massive national park. "Miles and miles of trails," he beamed, his smile so bright it brought one to my own face. A chance to really connect. The park was stunningly beautiful, but eerily empty. "Where is everyone?" I asked, looking around at the deserted trails. "It's a holiday weekend. Shouldn't it be packed?" "This place is huge," Andrew replied smoothly. "We probably just haven't crossed paths with anyone yet. Besides, I thought you wanted us to be alone." He winked, and I let the thought go. We hiked for what felt like hours, talking and laughing. We reached a high cliff with an old, weathered picnic table that offered a breathtaking view. "Let's take a picture," I said, leaning into him and pulling out my phone. Just as I lifted it to snap the photo, an enormous buck exploded from the trees right beside us. I shrieked in surprise. My phone flew from my hand, arcing through the air before plummeting down the cliffside. We heard a faint but definitive crack from below. "My phone," I yelled, frustration and despair washing over me. "All our pictures, everything is on there." Andrew placed a calming hand on my shoulder. "Hey, it's okay. It was an old phone anyway. You've been wanting to upgrade. First thing tomorrow, we get you the best phone on the market. I promise." He carefully climbed down, retrieved the shattered device, and placed the pieces in a plastic bag, stowing it in his pack. His calmness helped, but a knot of disappointment remained in my stomach. We continued our hike, the mood now more subdued. We came to an old wooden bridge that spanned a steep ravine. It groaned and creaked ominously under our weight. Andrew went first, testing each step. "It's sturdy," he called back. "Just take it slow." I held my breath the entire way across, my whole body tense with the expectation of the structure collapsing beneath me. On the other side, we found the spring he had promised, a beautiful spot where water trickled out of a mossy rock face into a clear pool. Andrew cupped his hands, drank from it, and splashed his face. "Try it," he said. "It's so pure." The water had a strange metallic tang, but before I could comment, he was already pointing further down the trail, his attention diverted. He suggested we find a more private spot, but I was still too upset about my phone to be in the mood. For a split second, a flash of something dark anger. Frustration crossed his face before it melted back into his usual understanding expression. Soon, we reached another bridge, this one even more rickety than the last. It spanned a terrifying drop. Andrew crossed first with ease. "Your turn," he called. I took a tentative step onto the first plank, then another. I was halfway across when a sickening crack echoed through the silent forest. The wood beneath my feet gave way. My hand shot out. Scrambling for purchase, the nails of my left hand dug into a splintered beam before my weight ripped them away. As I fell, my eyes locked with Andrew's, and what I saw there will haunt me forever. It wasn't shock or fear. It was a wide, malicious, and triumphant smile. Asterisk, then. There was only darkness. I don't know how long I was out. I awoke to a nightmare. A stag skull, bleached white, was leaning over me, its long, dry tongue rasping against the bloody fingers of my left hand. I screamed and scrambled backward, only to see Andrew's concerned face swimming into view above me. "Thank God you're okay," he whispered, his voice full of worry. He had bandaged my hand. "You took a bad fall. I need to go get help." "There's no signal down here. Just stay put and conserve your energy. I'll be back as soon as I can." Before I could form a word of protest, he was gone. The silence that descended was absolute. No birds, no wind, no insects. Just the deafening drum of my own panicked heartbeat. Hours bled into each other as night fell, painting the forest in shades of deep blue and black. Cold and in pain, I dragged myself to the spring and drank greedily. Ignoring the odd taste dot in a small, still pool of water, I saw my reflection. I was gaunt, skeletal, with patches of hair missing and blood caked on my temple. I stumbled away, tears blurring my vision, my head swimming with a pain that went beyond my physical wounds. Then I heard it. "Christy, where are you?" It was Andrew's voice. Relief, sweet and overwhelming, flooded my system. I turned towards the sound, ready to cry with joy. And I saw it. Calling my name in Andrew's voice was a monstrous, 8-foot-tall creature. Its legs were bent backwards like an animal's, connected to a skeletorso draped in sagging, ill-fitting flesh that seemed to shift and writhe as it moved. Its head was swollen and misshapen, with 2 sharp antlers protruding from its skull. Its mouth was a jagged mess of broken teeth, clattering together as it tried to form a smile. It hunched over, reaching for me with long, charred hands. Asterisk, you had struggled to say. The familiar voice, distorted and guttural. Asterisk, pure, unadulterated adrenaline surged through me. I yanked my hands back from its grasp and ran. I ran without thought, without direction, branches whipping my face, thorns tearing at my clothes. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave way. I found myself back at the cliff at the picnic table. Gasping for air, I saw an old metal trekking pole leaning against. The wood, its handle wrapped in worn electrical tape. I grabbed it just as the thing that wore Andrew's face pulled itself over the edge of the cliff without a moment's hesitation. Driven by sheer terror, I swung the pole with all my remaining strength. The brass tip struck its amorphous head, knocking a large chunk of fleshy, ashy material loose. Asterisk, the creature dropped to its knees. Smoke or ash began to rise from the wound on its head. The shifting flesh on its face struggled to reform into the handsome, familiar features of the man I loved. Asterisk, Elueo, a word sounding hollow and mimicked, like an animal. Trained to speak. Asterisk. Then its body collapsed into a confused pile of shifting shapes and dissipating ash. I stood there, trembling, tears streaming down my dirty face. I had turned my back on the remains of my fiancé and I fled. I stumbled through the undergrowth for what felt like an eternity, until suddenly the trees thinned and I spilled out onto asphalt under the harsh glow of electric lights. I had emerged into the parking lot of the bar, the same shitty bar where I had met Andrew 2 years ago. A small group of people smoking outside saw me, a bleeding, hysterical woman emerging from the woods, and rushed to my aid. I collapsed into their arms as police and ambulances were called. That was when I learned the truth. I had been missing for 10 years. The security footage from the bar showed that on that Tuesday night a decade ago, I had closed up alone. The footage then showed me moving in a trance-like state, walking directly into the forest behind the building. And at the edge of the trees, just before I disappeared, the grainy film showed a tall, shadowy figure waiting for me for 6 months. Search. Parties combed those woods. They found my shattered phone and one of my shoes. After that, all leads went cold. I was declared a cold case, presumed dead. There was no Andrew. There was no business. There were no friends. There was no engagement. The 2 wonderful years I remembered were beautiful, intricate, and in perfect lie of fantasy my mind constructed to protect me from the unimaginable horror of whatever truly happened to me during those 10 lost years. The scars on my wrists and ankles, which doctors said look like old rope or burns, are the only real evidence of that decade, and they tell a story I cannot remember. I try to tell myself every single day that he wasn't real. But the memories are so vivid. The love felt so profound and true. I still miss him. I loved Andrew. He was my soulmate, and sometimes when I wake up drenched in sweat from the night terrors, one thought lingers longer and is more terrifying than all the others. What would have happened if I had never dropped that phone? What if I had never broken? The illusion and seeing the monster behind the smile? Would I have ever escaped? Or would I still be there with him, happy and smiling, forever lost in the forest? What would you do for $100 an hour? Would you sit alone in a silent, abandoned warehouse? Would you ignore the footsteps that have no source? Would you follow just one rule and never, ever look? This is a story about the price of curiosity and the terrifying exhibition where the art is not just on display, it is alive. Everyone has a price. A point where desperation eclipses common sense. I wasn't evil. I wouldn't kill for money. But after, the divorce bled me dry. I was desperate enough to do things that skirted the edges of my morality. I needed to get out to start over, and for that, I needed cash. A lot of it, and fast. My day job wasn't going to cut it dot, so I did something profoundly stupid. I went looking for work on the dark web. The pay there was obscene, and I told myself I could avoid the truly heinous stuff. No sleeping with strangers. I filtered through forums until I found listings for deliveries and odd jobs. Most required a car, which I no longer had. Then I saw it. A listing that seemed too good to be true. Museum attendant needed, $100 hour, temporary exhibition, discretion required. The location was an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town, a place I'd driven past when my life still included a family. Car. The hours were 11 to 5, 6 days a week, for 3 months. I did the math. It was a life-changing amount of money. Enough for a deposit on an apartment and a cheap car. Enough to escape that my mind raced with the possibilities. It was obviously a front for something illegal, drugs, trafficking, something. Or maybe it was just some eccentric millionaire with a taste for the bizarre. Either way, $100 is $100. I pushed my doubts down and replied. The response was instant. I was hired. With the last of my cash, I bought a bike to get there and a pair of headphones to block out the silence. I arrived on Monday at 10 a.m., eager to start my lucrative new life. The warehouse was a cavernous, echoing space, but it was almost empty. The few items on display were peculiar, massive wooden statues, so tall they nearly touched the ceiling. their faces hidden as they bent down as if watching the floor for insects. Paintings adorned the walls, their subjects strange and unsettling. There were notebooks filled with frantic scribbles and drawings that made no sense. On a display table sat what looked like medieval surgical tools, rusted and cruel. And right next to them, a pair of ordinary modern scissors. The woman who let me in noticed my confusion. She was an unsettling paradox. Her skin was smooth and youthful, but her eyes were ancient, dark pools that darted around nervously. Her hands were wrinkled and stained, and her long black hair was tangled and unkempt at the ends. "Those scissors are authentic and extremely important," she said, her voice a dry whisper. I just nodded, deciding not to ask God. Then she led me to the back wall, an area shrouded in deep shadow, far from the entrance in my designated desk. She explained the dim lighting was for atmosphere. 3 items were displayed there. The first was a low, round wooden table. Its plaque read, "The Hunger." The edges of the table were chewed and clawed to splinters. The teeth marks were unmistakably human. It looked like a square table that had been gnawed into a circle. The second item was a pair of worn-out leather shoes on a simple stand. The plaque read, "The shoes that walked home." They were scuffed and broken down in impossible ways, as if the person wearing them had been walking in frantic, endless circles for years. The third item was just an empty pedestal. Its plaque sent a chill down my spine. Pied entier, do not look when occupied. An interesting concept, I mumbled, more to myself than to her. Her ancient eyes locked onto me. "Yes," she whispered. "Don't look when it's occupied, though." How would I even know? I started to ask. "You'll see," she interrupted sharply. "It is a very easy job. You sit, you do nothing. We value your discretion and your lack of curiosity above all else." And with that, she turned and walked out, shutting the heavy door behind her and leaving me utterly alone with the artifacts. My duty was simple: sit at the desk, greet any theoretical visitors, and sell tickets from a very small stack. It was clear they weren't expecting a crowd. I decided to put on my headphones and explore the paintings to pass the time. I walked too. The first one, titled "My Mother," it was a beautiful but ominous seascape, the water a crystal blue that seemed to be waiting for a storm. There was no mother in the painting. As I stood there, trying to decipher it, a sudden primal terror seized me. It was an unexplainable feeling. A cold certainty that I was not alone, that something was standing directly behind me. The urge to run was overwhelming, but I was too terrified to turn around. My heart hammered against my ribs. I took a deep breath, counted to 3, and instead of turning, I spun on my heel and sprinted back to the safety of my desk. "Ooh," I said out loud, my voice echoing in the vast space. "This place is creepy as fuck." "Why?" a voice replied. Asterisk, it was clear as day. A dry, curious voice that came from right beside me. My blood ran cold. My throat went sandpaper dry. I scanned the empty warehouse, my eyes darting from painting to statue to shadowy corner. "Who said that?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Who's there? You have to buy a ticket to be in here." There was no answer, only a profound, heavy silence. Then, from the back of the warehouse, near the 3 special items, came a soft clatter. My eyes were drawn to the empty pedestal. The painter. In the dim light, I could see a shadow now cast upon the wall behind it. It was the shadow of a figure, humanoid but crouched and distorted. I couldn't tell if it was facing me or facing away. A deep, penetrating cold settled into my bones. I slowly, carefully backed away to my chair and did not move for the rest of my shift. Later, I heard the footsteps. It's a sound you never forget, the way you can recognize a family member's walk from another room. These were slow, shuffling, and wet, a limp that carried a terrible weight. They moved through the back of the warehouse for a few seconds, and then simply faded away without ever reaching a destination. That night, I swore I would quit. It wasn't worth it. Then I saw the bank transfer. $1,200 for 1 day of sitting. The money hit my account like a drug. The fear was still there, but it was now muted by the sheer, undeniable power of that number dot. I dreamt of the footsteps. I dreamt they finally reached my desk, and now it is Tuesday. I am back at my post. As I write this, I can hear those wet, shuffling steps again, faintly, from the darkness where the hunger, the shoes, and the painter reside. I have so many questions. Are they connected? What story do they tell? But I am paid for my discretion. I am paid for my lack of curiosity. I am paid to sit, and I am paid not to look. I just hope that whatever is here with me appreciates my silence. A gunshot victim with no bullet, a missing organ, and a trail of slime leading from the autopsy table into a body bag holding another corpse. In the aftermath of the worst hurricane in history, a coroner makes a discovery that reveals we know nothing about the horrors that live in the deep ocean and what a storm can wash ashore. The body on my metal table was a puzzle. A man recovered from the floodwaters after the hurricane, with a single finger-width hole in his back near the right kidney. His prints came back with a long criminal record, so the assumption was simple. He was shot while looting. An open and shut case in the middle of a catastrophe, but something was wrong. The wound was all wrong. It was larger, rougher, with torn edges. It looked less like an entry wound and more like an exit wound. But that made no sense. If something exited his body, where was the entry point? And where was the bullet? The hurricane had been biblical. It was still raining outside, a constant grim drumming on the roof of the coroner's office. We were swamped, working insane overtime to process the dead. This one case, however, stuck out like a sore thumb. The man had clawed at his own back, his fingernails caked with his own skin and blood. A reaction to the pain, I had assumed. But the doubt nagged at me that the only way to solve this was to look inside. With everyone else overwhelmed, I worked alone, rolling the heavy cadaver onto his back and making the standard Y incision to open the chest and abdominal cavities. My colleague Flynn, 14 hours into his own hellish shift, looked over. Really? You're doing that now? I'm the doc. I call the shots, I replied, my voice muffled by my surgical mask. I've got this. You keep processing? He shrugged, too tired to argue. We were all running on coffee and fumes. A moment. I peered into the abdominal cavity. I knew my instincts were right. Things were not adding up. The right kidney was gone. Not just missing, but severed. The arteries and the ureter had been cleanly cut, as if sliced through with something sharp. A bullet doesn't do that. A bullet tears and shatters. It doesn't perform precise surgical extractions. So what does? Maybe the organ had been dislodged and was floating loose somewhere inside. I continued the examination, my focus narrowing. Then I found it, a large, perfectly round hole in the liver. This had to be it. The bullet must be lodged in here. I carefully removed the organ. It was cold and heavy in my gloved hands, wanting to slip away. It felt unusually dense. Curious, I placed it on the scale. 2.4 kilograms. That was massive for a liver. I made a note, peeled off my gloves to massage my stiff neck, and decided to grab a coffee. It was almost 11 p.m. I brought back coffee and water for both of us. Flynn thanked me with a tired nod. I chugged the entire water bottle, realizing I hadn't eaten or drank in hours. I suited back up in a fresh lab coat, gloves, mask, and goggles, ready to find that missing kidney. I stopped. Dead. The liver on the scale looked different, smaller, deflated. I stared at the digital readout. 1.1 kilograms. That was impossible. My notes clearly said 2.4. That's when I saw the trail. A dark, wet smear led from the metal plate of the scale, across the stainless steel counter, and down onto the tile floor, where it faded out halfway. Across the room. Flynn, I said, trying to keep my voice calm and failing miserably. Can you come look at this? He was at my side in an instant. What am I looking at? Asterisk. I weighed that liver at 2.4 kilos. I went to get coffee. I came back and it's 1.1 kilos, and there's this. We both stared at the gruesome trail. Flynn, Ever the pragmatist, ventured a guess. So, part of it fell? If it fell, why is there a trail that goes across the room? And Flynn? This body was pulled from the floodwaters. His eyes widened behind his safety goggles. Oh, this is bullet hole guy? Yep. A dreadful silence hung between us. We weren't looking for a piece of tissue. We were looking for whatever had been living inside that liver. And it had just crawled away. We've got to find it. Flynn whispered, his voice thick with dread. But what was it? My best guess was some kind of large eel or parasite that had washed in from the ocean during the storm. Something that had been living inside this man. We searched frantically, checking under cabinets, tables, every conceivable hiding place. Nothing. Then I had an idea. Blacklight. Flynn retrieved a long baton-style UV light and switched it on. He directed the beam at the scale. The trail glowed a sickly, phosphorescent yellow-green. It was even more extensive than we thought, and it wasn't a smooth smear. Along both sides of the main trail were tiny, precise marks, like the footprints of a centipede. My theory of an eel was rapidly crumbling. The nauseous feeling in my stomach intensified as the UV trail meandered across the floor, traveled up the wheel of a gurney, and coiled around its stainless steel leg. The trail ended at a closed body bag. A cold certainty gripped me. We're turning the body over. We flipped the black bag on the gurney, and there it was, a finger-sized hole, perfectly melted or chewed through the thick plastic, right over the chest of the cadaver inside. Oh God, Flynn gagged, bringing it gloved. Hand to his mouth. Take it to the freezer. Now, I commanded. We didn't hesitate. We pushed the gurney at a near run out of the autopsy room and down the hall toward the large, stainless steel doors of the walk-in freezer. With one hand on the gurney, I reached for the long horizontal handle to pull the door open. I felt a sharp, piercing pain on the back of my gloved hand. I told myself it was the zipper on the body bag. My head whipped around just as Flynn let out a choked scream. A shocked breath escaped my lips that it was on me. The thing from the liver. The front of it had a circular mouth ringed with sharp, radiating teeth, or mandibles. Behind that, a segmented, armored body was carried on dozens of sharp, inch-long legs that were currently digging into the nitrile glove and the skin of my hand. The entire creature was a nightmare of bone-like plating and jointed segments. I remember it with photographic clarity. In a blind panic, I flung my arm violently. The creature's needle-like legs were dug deep, and the force of my movement pulled the entire monstrosity, all 3 nightmarish feet of it, out from the hole in the body bag. It sailed through the air and hit the wall with a wet thud, leaving a slimy smear before flopping to the floor. Before I could even process what I'd seen, it righted itself with an unnatural speed. Its countless legs scratched frantically at the base of the exit door before finding a tiny gap right in the middle, and forcing its way through. I sprinted back down the hall, grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall, and kicked the exit doors open, bursting out into the pouring rain. I scanned the flooded parking lot under the dim yellow streetlights, and I saw it. Over by an overflowing storm drain, the water was rippling and churning as if a large fish were swimming there. Asterisk. Then it was gone. Down the drain and back to the ocean. I stood there in the rain, soaked and trembling, before walking slowly back inside. Flynn was frozen in place, staring at me. Sorry, he said. Though he had nothing to apologize for, I laughed, a raw, hysterical sound. Nothing to apologize for? You did everything right. What was that? He asked, his voice barely. A whisper. I have no idea. So it's just something that came up from the ocean and eats dead bodies? I shook my head as I peeled off my torn glove to look at the small bleeding pinpricks on my hand. Gunshot wound was supposed to be the cause of death, remember? The color drained from Flynn's face. I thought of the claw marks on the victim's back and wondered what would have happened if that thing had reached my neck instead of my gloved hand in the weeks that followed. I spoke with marine biologists. I sent samples for DNA analysis. The best answer I got was that it was distantly related to a type of deep-sea polychaete worm, but nothing like it had ever been documented. We simply don't know what lives in the deepest parts of the ocean. One biologist told me something I will never forget. We don't know half of what lives down there. If it's something new, we'll probably never know what it was. I'm sorry. The storm was a once-in-a-lifetime event. But these once-in-a-lifetime events are happening all the time now. And that thing, whatever it was, is out there. And it's not alone. My parents are in a coma. The doctors say it's unexplained. The police think I'm crazy. But I know the truth. For 1 week, a man with yellow eyes lived in our house. He never spoke a word. He never touched them. And yet, he consumed them from the inside out. This is my confession. And my warning, the smell of bleach and quiet despair is everywhere in this hospital waiting room. It's the smell of hope giving up. My parents are down the hall, lying in identical beds, their minds gone. The doctors keep using words like unprecedented and catatonic, but they're wrong. I know exactly what happened. I watched it happen, and the guilt is a physical pain, a hollowing out of my chest, because I know I could have stopped it. That my life was normal a week ago. Boring even. I'm 18, fresh out of the soul-crushing grind of high school finals. My parents are good, quiet people. My dad came to this country with nothing, and my mom was an orphan. It's always been just the three of us against the world. A small, unremarkable, loving unit. After my last exam, I collapsed in my bed. Slept for almost 24 hours straight. It was a deep, dreamless, healing sleep. When I finally woke up, the weight of the world was gone. I felt free. I went downstairs to the kitchen, expecting the normal Saturday morning smell of coffee. And toast thought my parents were there. But they weren't alone. Sitting in my chair, at our small kitchen table, was a man I had never seen in my life. He was in his mid-30s, with long straight black hair that fell past his shoulders, stark against his pale oxy skin, but his eyes were the first thing you noticed. A shocking, brilliant, jaundiced yellow, the color of a canary or a fading bruise. They were fixed on the bowl of cereal in front of them with an unnerving, total intensity. My parents looked up as I entered, and they smiled. But it was all wrong. Their smiles were bright, brittle, and stretched too wide. "Good morning, sleepyhead," my mom chirped, her voice a full octave too high. "Come, join us. There's someone we want you to meet." I stood frozen in the doorway, my brain short-circuiting. "This is a relative," my dad said, gesturing to the man with a strange, reverent sweep of his hand. From my side, he's been out of the country. He's going to be staying with us for a while. I finally found my voice. "A relative? What relative?" "Dad, you don't have any family here." "Mom, you don't have any at all." "They're manic?" Smiles flickered for a fraction of a second. A flash of panic behind their eyes before the forced cheerfulness snapped back into place. "Oh, a distant cousin," my mom said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's a long story. We'll tell you later. Now, sit. Have breakfast." I sat. The next 20 minutes were the most unnerving of my life. The man never spoke. He never looked up. He ate with a slow, deliberate, robotic precision. My parents, however, never stopped talking. They kept up a frantic, one-sided stream of chatter directed at him, answering questions he never asked, laughing at jokes he never told. "The weather's lovely today, isn't it?" my mom said to him. "You always did love the sun. We'll have to take you to the park later," my dad added, just like old times. It was insane. They were performing a play for an audience of one, and I was the only one who could see there was no script. Later, I cornered my dad. "Dad, seriously, who is that? Where did he come from?" His face went cold. The fake cheerfulness vanished, replaced by a stern, hard mask I hadn't seen since I was a kid. "His name is not your concern," he said, his voice low and flat. "He is our guest. You will treat him with respect. You will not ask questions. This is not up for discussion." Conversation was over. The door had been slammed shut. The next few days were a masterclass in creeping dread. The man was a silent, statuesque presence. He never spoke, not one word. I tried once. I found him alone in the living room, just standing in the center, staring at a blank wall. "Look," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't know who you are, but this is my house." My parents materialized in the doorway, as if summoned. "Don't be rude to our guest." My mother snapped, her voice sharp with a panic I didn't understand. "He is family, apologize." I retreated to my room, defeated and terrified. Our home became his temple. The rules began. At dinner, my mom would serve his plate first. We had to wait, our food getting cold, until he had finished every last bite with that same slow, methodical pace. Only then were we permitted to eat. Then we were forbidden from speaking to him directly. "If you have something to say, you say it to us," my dad instructed, his face grim. "We will relay the message." He was sitting right there, but the look in my father's eyes was a commandment, not a suggestion. Asterisk, the worst was the locked room, the spare bedroom upstairs. They cleared it out for him. They started spending hours in there with him, the door locked from the inside. They would take a tray of food and not emerge until long after dark. The mystery was eating me alive. I had to know. Last night, I did it. I waited until they were all inside. I crept up the stairs, my heart trying to punch its way out of my chest. The old house has old doors with old-fashioned keyholes. I knelt, my hands trembling, and put my eye to the cold brass. The room was dark, lit only by dozens of candles arranged on the floor. The air inside seemed to shimmer with heat. And in the center, he stood, ramrod straight, his head tilted back, his long, thin arms raised to the ceiling, fingers splayed. Utterly, unnaturally still. And my parents were on their knees before him, prostrated. Their bodies shook as they pressed their foreheads to the floor. And they were whispering, a low, rhythmic, frantic stream of gibberish. It wasn't a language. It was the sound of pure, terrified devotion. They weren't hosting a relative. They were worshiping a god. I scrambled back from the door, nausea and terror overwhelming me. This was a sickness, a cult. They were in danger. I was in danger. I ran to my room, locked the door, and called the police. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the phone. I whispered to the operator about the strange man, my parents' erratic behavior, my fear. They said a car was on its way. A wave of relief washed over me. Help was coming. Knock, knock. The sound was soft, polite. It came from my bedroom door. My blood turned to ice. I didn't move. Knock, knock. I knew. I had never heard him walk through the house before. He was always just there. But I knew. I slowly, shakily opened the door. He was there. The man with the long black hair and the terrible yellow eyes. And for the first time, he was looking directly at me. And he was smiling. It was a wide, thin-lipped, maniacal grin. A grotesque slash of white on his pale face. A smile of pure, triumphant malice. All the fear of the past week erupted out of me. Who are you? What have you done to them? Get out. The police are coming. They're coming for you. He didn't speak. The horrible smile never wavered. He just held my gaze for a long silent moment, then turned and walked calmly down the stairs. I followed him, stumbling, a roar of terror in my ears. He walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped outside. He didn't run. He just walked down our quiet suburban street, his tall, thin figure silhouetted against the streetlights, until he turned a corner and was gone. I ran back upstairs, screaming for my parents. I found them on the floor of the spare room amidst the dead candles. They were unconscious, their faces pale and slack. They were breathing, but it was shallow. They wouldn't wake up. The police arrived minutes later. It was a blur of flashing lights and questions. I told them everything. The man, the yellow eyes, the worship, him leaving. I gave them his description. Every detail burned into my memory. The officers were sympathetic, but I saw the skepticism in their eyes. They said, they'd check our home security footage. We have cameras on the front and back doors. I sat at the kitchen table, my head in my hands as one officer reviewed the footage on his laptop. After a few minutes, he called his partner over. "Hey, check this out." He turned the screen to... It was the footage from just minutes ago. I saw myself, a frantic figure, following something. I saw myself screaming at the empty doorway. I saw the front door open and close, as if by a gust of wind. But the man with the yellow eyes, he wasn't there. He wasn't in the footage at all. It looked like I was having a psychotic breakdown, screaming at nothing. "There's no one there, son," the officer said gently. "The cameras didn't pick up anyone entering or leaving all night, except for you." I was still staring, my mind refusing to process it, when I heard the other officer on his phone in the other room. His voice was low and urgent. "Yeah, another one, same as the others. Parents catatonic. Kids talking about a tall guy with yellow eyes? No, nothing on the cameras. It's the 5th one this year." He trailed off as he saw me looking. They wouldn't tell me anything else, so now I'm here. My parents are gone, their minds vacated. The doctors have no answers, but I have the answer. He was real. He was a predator who fed on devotion and left empty shells behind. He drained my parents dry and then he moved on. And the officer's words, "The 5th one this year." He's still out there. He's doing this to other families. I could have stopped it. I should have called the police the first day. The first hour. The moment I saw him sitting in my chair. But I waited. I was scared. I was confused. I was the only one who could see the monster, and I did nothing until it was too late. And now my parents are gone, and it's my fault. What if the most beautiful place you've ever seen was the most dangerous? What if the perfect campsite wasn't a gift from nature, but a carefully laid trap? I'm an experienced hiker. I have seen everything the woods have to offer. But I found something that shouldn't exist. A clearing so perfect it was wrong. And I made the mistake of spending the night there. This is what happened when the sun went down. I need to write this down. I need to get it out of my head and into the world before I go completely insane. I need to warn anyone who might be tempted by a beautiful, quiet place in the deep woods. I'm not some amateur. I'm an experienced hiker. I thrive in the remote places, the spots on the map where the trails fade and you're truly on your own. For a long weekend, I chose a remote state forest, planning a simple overnight trip. Hike 5 or 6 miles in, find a spot to camp, enjoy the solitude, and hike out. The journey in was everything I love. Crisp air, a cloudless blue sky, the golden light of a late autumn sun filtering through the trees. The only sounds were my boots on the fallen leaves, the distant chatter of birds, and the gentle whisper of the wind. It was pure, absolute peace. After a few hours, I started looking for a campsite. I needed a flat spot, not too close to the trail, near water. And then I found it wasn't just a good spot, it was perfect. Unnaturally so, I pushed through a thicket of ferns and stepped into a clearing that looked like it was designed by a landscape architect. It was a perfect circle, about 40 feet across. The ground was covered in a carpet of short, unbelievably soft, vibrant green grass. It felt like a golf course, not a forest floor. And the trees, they formed a perfect, unbroken ring around the edge. Ancient oaks and pines stood shoulder to shoulder, their branches interlocking high above to form a natural dome, leaving this one perfect circle open to the sky. It felt safe, protected, like a private room offered by the forest itself. A tiny voice in my head whispered that it was too symmetrical, too ideal, but I was too enchanted to listen. I had found paradise. I dropped my pack with a sigh of pure contentment and got to work. My tent went up easily, the stakes sinking into the soft earth. I gathered firewood from outside the circle and built a small pit in the very center. As the sunset, painting the sky above in brilliant oranges and purples, I had a cheerful little fire crackling. I ate my simple meal, sipped my coffee, and felt a deep, satisfying joy. This was why I did this dot then. True darkness fell. The friendly woods of the day became a world of shadows. But inside my circle of light, I felt secure. I doused the fire completely, ensuring not a single ember remained, and crawled into my tent. I zipped the flap shut, settled into my sleeping bag, and waited for sleep. That's when the feeling started. It was a faint, subtle movement beneath me. A wriggling sensation right under the floor of the tent. It felt like a vast colony of insects, shifting and squirming just inches below the surface. I tried to dismiss it. It's the woods, they're bugs. But it was constant, a low grade, creepy crawly feeling against my back that I couldn't ignore. Then the noises began. From outside, from the ring of trees, came soft, deliberate sounds. A snap of a twig, a rustle of dry leaves. But they were moving, circling the clearing. Snap, rustle, snap. It was too rhythmic, too purposeful to be a random animal. My heart began to pound a little harder. I lay perfectly still, listening. And then I saw the shadows dot my tent as light-colored nylon. The moon was bright, casting the shadows of the tree branches onto the walls, but there was no wind. The air was utterly still, asterisk, yet the shadows were moving. Not swaying, slithering. They were long, thin, finger-like shadows, and they were stroking the outside of my tent. I could see them tracing the seams, probing the fabric, like something was out there, curiously feeling its way around my shelter. I sat bolt upright, my breath catching in my throat. I grabbed my powerful flashlight from the mesh pocket, my hands shaking. I flicked it on, pointing the beam at the tent wall. The shadow vanished. I swept the light around inside. Nothing, just me and my gear. I turned the light off. The shadow fingers immediately returned, caressing the thin fabric. Terror seized me completely. The wriggling sensation from the ground had intensified. It was no longer vague. It was a rapid, insistent tapping, like 1,000 tiny needles drumming against the tent floor from below. I fumbled for the flashlight again, my palms slick with sweat, and pointed the beam down at the floor beside my sleeping bag, and I saw it. The grass had come through. Dozens of thin, blade-like shoots of that soft green grass had pierced the thick nylon floor of my tent. They were sticking up about half an inch, like a tiny, manicured lawn sprouting inside my shelter, and they were moving. They were swaying back and forth in a perfect, horrifying, hypnotic unison. Swish, swish, swish. They weren't just blades of grass. They were feelers, cilia. They were tasting the air inside my tent. They were searching for me. I screamed. I scrambled for the tent zipper, my fingers numb and clumsy. The sound of the zipper was deafening in the silence. I burst out of the tent and stumbled to my feet in the center of the clearing, whipping the flashlight beam around wildly. The clearing was empty. The circle of trees was silent. For a split second, I thought I had imagined it all. Maybe it was a nightmare. Then I turned the light back onto my tent dot and my world ended. The tree branches weren't coming from the trees. They were coming from the ground. Dozens of thick, dark, root-like tendrils, the color of wet soil, had erupted from the perfect green grass. They were wrapped around my tent, constricting it, squeezing the life out of it. The sleek dome was misshapen, buckling inwards under immense pressure. The roots were fibrous and pulsing with a slow, rhythmic beat, like a network of dark veins. They were pulling the tent downward, into the earth, which was softening, yielding, opening up to swallow it. My tent was being eaten, digested in that moment of absolute, soul-crushing horror. I understood everything. The clearing wasn't a clearing. It was a thing, a living thing. The soft grass was a lure, the tender lining of a mouth. The perfect circle of trees was the rim of a jaw, and I had walked right in, set up my camp on its tongue, and built a fire in its throat. I didn't think. I didn't grab my pack, my phone, my wallet. It was all in the tent, being consumed. The only thing I had was the flashlight in my hand. I ran. I sprinted for the gap in the trees that led to the trail. Every step on that soft, green grass had a sickening, sucking quality, as if the ground itself was trying to hold my feet. I crashed through the ferns and onto the hard-packed dirt of the trail. And I didn't stop. The run back was a blur of pure animal terror. The flashlight beam jittered and bounced, turning every tree root into a slithering tendril, every shadow into a gaping maw. I ran until my lungs were on fire, until my legs gave out, until I was sobbing and gasping for air. After an eternity, I saw a glint of metal through the trees. My car. I have never seen a more beautiful sight. I burst from the tree line, fumbled for the spare key in my pocket, and with shaking hands, finally got it into the lock. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and locked it. The sound of the engine roaring to life was the sweetest sound I have ever heard. I didn't look back. I drove all night, fueled by pure adrenaline, not stopping until the sun was high in the sky and I was hundreds of miles away. I'm in a motel room now. I'm safe, but I'm not okay. I close my eyes and I see it. The wiggling grass, the pulsing roots. My tent being dragged into the earth. I didn't find a campsite. I found a predator, and I was the meal.